Welcome back to the Freemilesmc, and we are today freezing our asses off in Poland to answer the question, can you ride an adventure bike with 125cc? Because we are here today with the Malaguti Dune 125. And let's have a look at this gorgeous bike. The bike here, the way it stands here, is for an adventure bike and also for 125, relatively good looking. It visually reminds me a lot of the V-Strom with the beak at the front, and I feel like this is a bike that's particularly very interesting for older people who are able to ride their motorbikes with the license that is specifically made for the 125s, for people who have a car in Europe or in the countries where people with a car license can already ride a 125. So what do you get in this package? The 125cc engine has 13.8 horsepower and around 11 newton meters of torque. The engine is liquid cooled. The Malaguti now as a brand maybe doesn't say a lot to people, but it's an Italian brand that produces their stuff in China, which is very common nowadays. But the engine is a Aprilia licensed rebuild. What does that exactly mean? It means it's basically an engine out of a Aprilia, but we cannot be 100% sure that the same materials have been used. Still, when researching this motorbike on the forums of people who actually own this motorbike already, it seems to be a quite reliable part of the bike. So, apart from that, you have typical adventure bike stuff. This is the more road-focused version. There's also the Dune X. This one has a 19-inch front wheel and 17-inch in the rear, and relatively big rear tires. Like, this is a 130 tire on a 125, and when riding behind the bike, the contact patches looks really big. And you get around 160 millimeters of suspension travel, and technically, this bike doesn't have like any LEDs or anything, but you can charge your phone on it. It has a nice little electrical socket. Doesn't have an off-switchable ABS, but they constructed it in a way that you can very easily pull out the ABS fuse, and they even labeled it ABS fuse so you can pull it out. Kind of how I used to do it on my Interceptor. So this very gorgeous bike has been provided by Pavel, fan of the channel. Welcome. Yeah, hello, nice to have you. How did you end up owning this machine, and why did you decide yourself for the Malaguti Dune 125?
So, the reason mainly why I've choose this bike over the others is that I first of all don't have a license, and I can only drive 125 capacity bikes, so I've decided to find the biggest one I can find, which is adventure-ish enough for my needs, because I'm a real adventure fan. Probably that was the main reason for me to choose that. I was researching for bike to buy, and I've decided to go with the new one, so my choices were pretty much limited to only this model, which I quickly fell in love with.
Yeah, in general, I feel like you're definitely in a very similar target demographic to a lot of people, and this is also reflected by this bike. I would not say this is a bike now for 16-year-old people who just start to drive motorcycles. To be honest, this demographic kind of died as like it's just gotten too expensive to get into motorcycle riding. And in particular, the price of this machine, the list price, is $3,300, which is really affordable and quite decent, but those bikes are pretty sought after, as if you've paid a bit more than the list price.
Yeah, I've paid around 5,000 euros for this.
Okay.
But also I've got the upper crash bars in this price.
So we already kind of know you can expect to pay a bit more than MSRP for this machine, but all in all, it looks pretty decent and it seems to be catered to an older audience. The bike has a 79 centimeter seat height, and that's roughly how that looks on a man my size. For context, I am 1.95 m or 6'5", and it's decent. My legs fit nicely onto the tank. So let's take the bike for a spin and see if you can go adventure motorbike riding with 125cc. Short interruption for myself here. I am actually opening up a second YouTube channel for cars for 2025. Definitely check it out. The link is in the description. So let's have a look at how the Malaguti 125 is riding. Let's go. You have your feet very much underneath you in the bike. The suspension travel of 160 millimeters feels relatively stiff a bit. Yeah, let's see what the thing can do. We're here now in relatively soft gravel, but standing up on the bike and everything works well. You can actually take out the rubber part out of the foot pegs, which is really nice. Yeah, and here on the gravel road it's definitely noticeable that the suspension is a bit on the harder side, which makes sense as it's a road-orientated bike, but it still handles this relatively fine. The foot pegs are a bit small for my feet, but in general it's still manageable for a man my size, most definitely. And it also feels comfortable to ride. And with the very low weight, I'm pretty sure this thing could also handle some more intensive road than this. It's just the most that we have here in Poland right now, because in Poland riding off-road is legally a bit dicey. And in general, I feel like an adventure bike is kind of the best thing you can get as a 125, because when you then actually tour a machine like this, you're never really actually going all that quick. Like, I know on my tour maybe really speed it up with the Interceptor and like used it for riding fast maybe like 5 times, and a lot more riding on a big motorcycle trip is more about exploring the landscape. And you can definitely do that on a machine like this completely fine. You can definitely also notice how this is supposed to be a more high class offer of a motorcycle. Like, you have a gear indicator and all this nice stuff that you usually don't find on bikes in this class. And also, we're now going full throttle. The bike really finds a second life after 7,000 RPM and then actually manages to really get going. The engine does not feel weak. I can compare it to 125s of MASH and Sim, and comparison to those, it is relatively fine, as some 125s can feel just super weak. I think when actually touring the bike, it could be a bit annoying to then like get off the bike, take whatever you have stored on the rear seat, and to pull the ABS plug when you do some serious off-roading. So, but you can maybe like build yourself a little ABS switch for that. So let's see how this bike performs on road, as let's be honest, that's where you will be using the thing mostly. One thing about the bike is the heat management. In the summer this engine can get really hot, that's what Pavel told me, and he got really hot around his legs. Now here in the winter, this is really amazing because you can literally touch the clutch case thing and you can like warm your hands on it. And that's honestly really sick. So, and here you see the bash protector. The bash protector is out of plastic, but it seems to be some more stronger plastic. Like this stuff is sturdy, and you roughly basically have the frame underneath it, and the oil filter is over here. Compared to other bikes like the BMW GS 310, you can actually bottom this thing out, and it has a ground clearance of 22 centimeters, so actually relatively decent. So now we're about to take the Malaguti Dune onto the road. But one thing that I already noticed while looking at the bike is that the center stand goes relatively low, and I'm a bit worried that it could touch the ground if you really push the bike. So let's have a look at how quickly this side stand is touching the ground. Yeah, here it touches the ground then. That is not super early, but definitely if you really start pushing the bike in very tight turns, you can definitely get the center stand onto the ground. It's also completely solid, so if you do, you can potentially leverage yourself off of your motorbike. So that is definitely a concern. If you really push this bike and also have use it on back roads, basically like a supermoto, potentially take off the center stand, definitely. So we're now with the Malaguti 125 on the open road. So let's see what it can do. It definitely, typical for 125, takes some time to get going. But it is, compared to other 125s, no slouch, definitely. And here now on the side of the tire, you realize it is definitely a road-focused machine. The top speed of the bike is 100 kilometers an hour. When it comes to its adventure capability, a lot of people then say, oh yeah, but 100 kilometers an hour is definitely not a lot for the highway. And yes, it's not a lot, but it definitely works. And really, take my word from it, I'm from Germany. We have a pretty intense highway. And so often I see people in the comments even say that 650s don't have enough power for the highway. That's all complete rubbish. This thing definitely, you can tour on the highway with it, because when I'm with my Interceptor riding on the highway to get from A to B, I also basically slow down to 100 kilometers an hour. Going a bit slower through this village, the bike definitely feels comfortable, and also at lower speeds it doesn't rattle itself to death at all. It's not vibration intense in the slightest. That's really nice compared to other 125 single cylinders. But for that, it does its job relatively well. The more modern bike that is compliant with Euro 5 norm has a bit less power, because they've been making these for 10 years now, and the engine base from Aprilia is from the 90s. So yeah, one thing though that definitely has to be said, especially here in these temperatures, is that the wind protection is relatively and also I don't really have the biggest confidence in the tires, because it's a Chinese bike at the end of the day. So yeah, and also I don't really want to push the bike now in this temperature, especially also with the very low hanging center stand. But speaking of a few negative things, let's get to the summary, because sadly this bike has a few Chinese bike factors that sadly need to be addressed. So as I just mentioned in the motovlog, this bike rides relatively decent off-road and on-road for what it is, but sadly this bike has a few of the typical Chinese bike gremlins. For example, the wiring is pretty bad. I'm in specific talking about the insulation of the wires here. I am not really 100% positive if the bike would survive driving through a river or driving through heavy rain or a lot of mud. That could potentially kill the bike. Apart from that, you have other things. For example, the chain and sprocket look horrendous. They're very rattly. You're kind of scared of the chain snapping when driving behind the bike from just looking at it. So that's definitely a weak point. And we don't 100% know what the engine is made out of material-wise. Of course, it's a rebuild, but with those rebuilds, that's something that maybe many people don't know. You never 100% know if it's the same materials. A good example here is the company Mash. They also make 125s. They're originally from France, and they use licensed Honda rebuilds, and their bikes, the engines just blow up relatively early. But with this bike, even though we don't know the material of the licensed rebuild for the engine, it seems to be decent, as in the forums for this bike no one's really complaining about engine issues. So this all seems to be good. So what do I now think of the Malaguti 125 when it comes to riding it? I would say it's a relatively decent bike, and you can definitely use this as an adventure bike. You can you can use this for big tours. I would then change the chain and sprocket and maybe isolate the wires. On those issues, those are also things you can actually do to a bike. The bike is in its price range. Kind of the direct competitor would be the Sim, I think NHX it's called. Sim is a company that produces scooters from Taiwan, and they also have a 125 adventure bike with like 10 horsepower, which is pretty good. I used to sell these in a dealership, and they are decent. They're definitely a decent machine. They're well put together, and they work very well. But this one is more powerful. Therefore, you have the issues with the chain, so you kind of need to see where your priorities are. The bike that is in the same price range that basically doesn't have reliability issues is the Honda CB 125F. That is technically not an adventure bike, but you can use it in that regard. So that's kind of where this bike falls into. If you really want basically kind of the most you could potentially get out of an adventure bike on this license, then this is your bike. The answer to the question, can you have a 125cc adventure bike? The answer to that is most definitely yes, as the way that you use these bikes, it's compatible with having a 125cc, as you're just exploring your surrounding, you're exploring a different country, you're not going crazy fast in those regards. And on top of that, a 125cc bike can be a lot of fun also on a country back road. We're just a bit used to the discussion of how much cc you actually need, and you don't need that much. Like a lot of people say, oh yeah, it's too weak for this, it's too weak for that. Also with a lot of bigger bikes, and this doesn't really apply to like many countries. Like some of the cross-country roads are a bit more stretched out in like Western Europe and the US and so on, and Australia. But like for anywhere else, you're definitely fine with this, and it's a bike whose legs you can actually stretch on these kinds of roads. So I would say you can definitely use a bike like this as an adventure bike. Definitely feel free to leave your opinion on the Malaguti Dune 125 in the comments, and check out the Patreon, and see you guys in the next episode.